He believed perception was the only reality, until a single scuff mark on the floor and the quiet janitor he publicly fired for it brought his perfectly polished world crashing down.
Our new CEO, Richard Sterling, was a man obsessed with surfaces. Not just the polished mahogany of the boardroom table or the gleaming chrome of the elevator doors, but the very surface of our company's image. He believed perception wasn't just part of reality, it was the only reality that mattered. He wore suits that cost more than my car, and his shoes were always so perfectly polished you could see your own disappointed reflection in them. He walked our halls not like a leader, but like a museum curator, constantly on the lookout for a fingerprint on the glass, a speck of dust on the pedestal. And his biggest frustration, his most frequent target of disdain, was Eleanor Vance. Eleanor had been the night shift janitor at Innovate Solutions for 15 years. She was a fixture, a quiet, steady presence who moved through the building after we'd all gone home, restoring order to the chaos we left behind. I'm a department head, so I often work late, and I'd see her. She wasn't just mopping floors and emptying bins. She had a kind of grace to her work. She'd straighten the pictures on the wall that had been knocked askew, water the sad little office plants everyone else forgot, and I once saw her meticulously fixing the broken wheel on a junior analyst chair with a small toolkit she kept on her cart. She was part of the building's soul. She always had one earbud in, listening to what I assumed was music or a podcast. She'd offer a soft smile and a nod as I passed, and there was a calm dignity about her that made the sterile corporate environment feel a little more human. Richard, of course, didn't see any of that. He saw a woman in a gray uniform who didn't fit his glossy vision. He'd complain in management meetings about the lingering smell of cleaning products or the scuff marks in the lobby. He was always looking for a reason, any reason, to replace our long-standing contract with a high-end boutique sanitation firm whose employees would probably wear branded polo shirts and look more like tech support than janitors. The day it all happened, the tension in the office was already sky-high. We were expecting a major potential investor group for a tour. It was a billion-dollar deal, the kind that could transform the company. Richard had been on a rampage all week, a tightly wound spring of anxiety and arrogance. Every surface had to be perfect. Every employee had to look perfect. He'd sent out a 5-page memo on dress code and professional etiquette for the visit. It was insane. The investors were due at 10 a.m. At 9:45, Richard was doing his final frantic patrol of the main lobby, and that's when he saw it. A faint, black scuff mark on the pristine white marble floor, right in front of the main reception desk. It was barely noticeable, the kind of thing a normal person's brain would edit out, but to Richard, it was a declaration of war. His face went from pale to crimson in a heartbeat. "Where is she?" he hissed at the terrified receptionist. "Get her out here, now!" The receptionist fumbled with her phone, her hand shaking. A few minutes later, Eleanor appeared from a service corridor pushing her cart. She was finishing up her shift, preparing for the day crew to take over. She looked tired, but as composed as ever. "Did you do this?" Richard's voice wasn't a shout, it was worse. It was a low, controlled snarl that cut through the nervous hum of the office. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger at the scuff mark. Eleanor looked down at the mark, then back at him. Her expression was neutral. "Sir, the day gets busy. Scuff marks happen. I can have it buffed out in 5 minutes." 5 minutes? Richard laughed, a short, ugly bark. "The most important people to ever walk into this building will be here in 3 minutes. Do you understand the level of incompetence we're talking about here? This isn't just a mark on the floor. It's a mark on this company. It's a reflection of our standards." He was projecting, his own terror of failure curdling into rage and finding the easiest target. The entire open-plan office had gone silent. Everyone was watching, pretending to type, pretending to be on the phone. My own fingers were frozen over my keyboard. I felt a hot knot of shame twisting in my stomach. This was wrong, utterly, disgustingly wrong. But like everyone else, I was paralyzed. Richard's temper was legendary. Speaking up was professional suicide. What Richard didn't realize in his self-important fury was that he wasn't just performing for his employees, he was performing for a camera. A young marketing intern, Chloe, had been tasked with capturing authentic, day-in-the-life footage of our dynamic CEO for a new recruitment video. She'd been trailing Richard all morning with a high-end smartphone on a gimbal, getting shots of him looking commanding and visionary. And now she was standing just a few feet away, her eyes wide with horror, the little red recording light on her phone still blinking. She was capturing every single humiliating second. "I expect a certain presentation," Richard continued, stepping closer to Eleanor, invading her space. He looked her up and down, his lip curled in disgust. "This entire operation, from the top down, needs to reflect excellence. We can't have people like you dragging us down with this carelessness. It's a simple job, and you can't even do that right." Eleanor didn't flinch. She simply stood there, her gaze steady. She looked him directly in the eye, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something in her expression. Not fear, but something closer to pity. It seemed to make Richard even angrier. "You know what? I've had enough," he snapped. "We're done. You're done. Pack up your things. Your contract is terminated, effective immediately. Get out of my building." He fired her, right there, in the middle of the lobby, in front of 50 employees and a rolling camera, for a scuff mark. Eleanor said nothing. She didn't beg or argue. She just gave a single, slow nod. She turned without another word, took hold of her cart, and began pushing it toward the service corridor, her back ramrod straight. The dignity in that silent retreat was more powerful than any shouting match could have been. Richard, looking smug and triumphant, smoothed his tie, just as the glass door slid open and the investors walked in. He transformed instantly, his face splitting into a brilliant, predatory smile. "Gentlemen, welcome to Innovate Solutions," he boomed, striding forward to shake their hands.
The office slowly came back to life, but the air was thick and sour. Chloe, the intern, was pale as a ghost. She quickly stopped the recording, her hands trembling so badly she almost dropped the phone. She looked at me, her eyes screaming with panic, silently asking what she should do. I just shook my head, not having a single answer for her. For the rest of the day, a dark cloud hung over us. The investor meeting apparently went well, but no one could shake what we'd witnessed. Richard was in a fantastic mood, gloating about his decisive leadership. Around 4 p.m., I saw Chloe scurrying from the marketing department to HR, looking like she was about to throw up. An hour later, an email landed in my inbox. It was from our head of HR, forwarded to all senior management. The subject line was just one word: footage. Attached was a video file. I clicked on it, and my blood ran cold. It was Chloe's video, crystal clear audio, a perfect, unobstructed shot of the entire horrifying exchange. The file wasn't just sent to us. The email body was a short, terse message from HR. "This has been uploaded to the board's private server for their mandatory review this evening. An emergency session has been called for 7 a.m. tomorrow." I stared at the screen, the video's thumbnail a frozen image of Richard's contorted face and Eleanor's calm defiance. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This wasn't just a complaint, this was an execution. Chloe hadn't just documented an event. She'd provided the evidence, the weapon, and the motive all in one tidy MP4 file. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of feigned productivity. No one spoke of it, not openly, but the knowledge spread through the management team like a virus. You could see it in the way people avoided each other's eyes, the way conversations died when you walked into the break room. We were all complicit. We had all stood there and done nothing. Richard, meanwhile, was a ghost at the feast, completely oblivious to his own haunting. He floated through the office on a cloud of self-congratulation, clapping people on the back, talking loudly about the synergy and positive energy the investors had felt. At 5 p.m., he called an impromptu meeting in the main conference room. He stood at the head of the table, beaming, and talked about the importance of brand integrity and how every single detail, from our quarterly reports down to the shine on our floors, contributes to success. He actually said, sometimes you have to trim the fat. You have to make tough decisions to excise elements that don't align with our forward-facing vision. He was talking about Eleanor. He was calling a 15-year veteran of this company fat to be trimmed, and he was proud of it. I had to clench my fists under the table to stop myself from shaking. When the meeting ended, I saw Chloe slipping out, looking even more terrified than before. I caught up to her by the elevators. "Chloe," I said softly. She jumped, spinning around. "Oh God, Mr. Henderson, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to do. You did the right thing," I cut her off. "You absolutely did the right thing. Are you okay?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "He's going to fire me, isn't he?" "I don't think he's going to be in a position to fire anyone after tomorrow morning," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The board was notoriously ruthless, but they were also notoriously loyal to their hand-picked CEO. This could go either way. They could sweep it under the rug, sacrifice the intern who filmed it, and give Richard a slap on the wrist. The thought made me sick. That night, sleep was impossible. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the scene from the lobby replaying in my mind. Richard's venomous condescension, the stunned silence of 50 professionals, and Eleanor's unwavering dignity. I kept thinking about all the little interactions I'd had with her over the years. About 6 months ago, I was working late on a massive project, buried in spreadsheets and feeling completely overwhelmed. She had come into my office to empty the trash and noticed the thick logistics textbook sitting on the corner of my desk. "Operations management," she'd said, her voice quiet. "That's a good one. A bit dated on the supply chain models, but the core principles of process analysis are solid." I'd blinked at her, surprised. "You've read it?" A small smile touched her lips. "A few times. I'm working on my master's online in industrial and systems engineering." She gestured to the single earbud she always wore. "Keeps the mind busy while the hands are working." We talked for 10 minutes about bottleneck theory and lean manufacturing. She was brilliant, genuinely deeply intelligent. She saw the company not as a collection of departments and titles, but as a single, complex machine. She knew its rhythms, its inefficiencies, its pressure points, because she walked its halls every night when the machine was supposed to be asleep. She saw the overflowing recycling bins from the marketing department after a big campaign, the cluster of burnt-out fluorescent bulbs over the engineering bullpen that no one had reported for a month, the way the third-floor conference rooms were constantly being overbooked while the fifth-floor ones sat empty. She saw the whole system in a way none of us, not even Richard, ever could, and we had just let him throw her away like a piece of trash. The next morning, I was in the office by 6:30 a.m. The other senior managers were already there, huddled around the coffee machine like survivors of a shipwreck, speaking in hushed, anxious tones. The air was thick with a funeral dread. We were all just waiting for the axe to fall, and none of us knew whose neck it was aimed for. At 6:55, Richard Sterling strolled in, whistling. He was wearing another impeccable suit, this one a cheerful blue, and holding a ridiculously expensive-looking coffee. "Morning, team," he chirped, striding towards the boardroom. "Ready for the big emergency? I'm betting it's a counteroffer from the investors. Told you they loved us." He was completely, blissfully unaware that he was the emergency. He winked at me as he passed. I felt my stomach turn over. He reached the boardroom door just as Mr. Abernathy, the chairman of the board, stepped out to greet him. Abernathy was an old-school corporate titan, a man who looked like he'd been chiseled out of granite. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Richard," he said, his voice dangerously low, "we've seen the video." The color drained from Richard's face. His confident smile dissolved. The video? He stammered. It was a minor disciplinary issue, a contract employee. Abernathy just stared at him, his silence more damning than any accusation. The boardroom door was still open, and I could see the other board members sitting around the table, their faces grim. The stage was set. The executioner was ready. Just then, the main elevator pinged. The polished chrome door slid open. We all turned, expecting, I don't know who we were expecting, maybe someone from corporate legal? But it wasn't. It was Eleanor Vance. She wasn't wearing her gray janitor's uniform. She was dressed in a simple, perfectly fitted black pantsuit and a crisp white blouse. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant twist. She held a sleek leather portfolio under one arm. She looked poised, confident, and utterly in charge. She walked past the coffee station, past the silent, gaping senior managers, and right past the stunned, ashen-faced Richard Sterling. She didn't even glance at him. She walked directly to the boardroom, where Mr. Abernathy, the chairman of the board, stepped aside and held the door open for her. She gave him a respectful nod, and then she walked in.
The boardroom door clicked shut, leaving Richard Sterling frozen in the hallway. He looked like a statue commemorating the exact moment a man's soul leaves his body. His mouth was slightly open, his expensive coffee forgotten in his hand. The rest of us were just as stunned, standing amidst our desks and coffee cups, trying to process the impossible sight we had just witnessed. Eleanor Vance, the janitor Richard had so publicly humiliated, had just walked into an emergency board meeting about his conduct as if she owned the place, and the chairman had held the door for her. The silence that followed was profound. It was the kind of silence that has a weight to it, pressing down on you. Richard finally snapped out of his stupor, his face a mottled patchwork of confusion and rage. "What the hell was that?" he spluttered, looking around at us as if we held the answers. "Is this some kind of joke?" No one answered. We were all staring at the solid mahogany door, behind which the entire power structure of our company was being rewritten. The next hour was the longest of my life. Work was a fantasy. Emails went unread, phones rang unanswered. The entire senior management team just lingered, pretending to shuffle papers, our attention laser-focused on that closed door. Richard paced back and forth in front of it like a caged animal, muttering to himself, his blue suit suddenly looking cheap and ill-fitting. Around 8:15 a.m., the door finally opened. Richard lunged towards it, his face a mess of desperation. "Mr. Abernathy, I can explain." But it wasn't Abernathy who came out. It was one of the other board members, a stern woman named Miss Dubois. She held a single piece of paper. She looked at Richard with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Richard Sterling," she said, her voice echoing in the silent office. "Your employment with Innovate Solutions is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings, and then they will escort you from the premises. Your access cards have been deactivated." Richard staggered back as if he'd been physically struck. "You can't! I brought in the billion-dollar deal. You are a liability, Mr. Sterling," Miss Dubois said, her voice like chipping ice. "You are a reputational risk this company can no longer afford. Security is on its way." She turned and went back into the boardroom, closing the door firmly in his face. The show was over. Richard stood there for a moment longer, a deflated balloon of a man, before two stony-faced security guards appeared and flanked him, gently but firmly guiding him toward his corner office. We all watched him go, a pathetic and ignominious end to a reign of terror. But the big question still hung in the air, a silent, screaming question mark that filled the entire floor. What about Eleanor? Another 30 minutes crawled by. Finally, at almost 9 a.m., the boardroom door opened again. This time, the entire board filed out, led by Mr. Abernathy. And right there, walking beside him, was Eleanor. Her face was composed, serious, but I could see a new light in her eyes. Not triumph, but a quiet, powerful resolve. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, and the office fell so quiet you could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. "As you have just witnessed," he began, his voice booming with authority, "Richard Sterling is no longer with this company. The board has made a unanimous decision." He paused for dramatic effect, letting his gaze sweep over all of us. His behavior yesterday was not just unprofessional, it was a betrayal of the core values we claim to uphold. It revealed a catastrophic failure in his judgment and a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes this company work. He then turned and gestured towards Eleanor, which brings me to my next announcement. My heart was pounding. I had no idea what was coming, but I knew it was going to change everything. "For the past 2 years," Abernathy continued, "Eleanor Vance has been more than just a member of our sanitation staff. She has been a participant in a highly confidential board-level management development program, a program designed to identify individuals with extraordinary potential from within every level of our organization." A collective gasp went through the office. I thought back to our conversation about logistics textbooks, about her master's degree. It all clicked into place. The earbud. She wasn't listening to music. She was listening to lectures, to business audiobooks, to market analysis reports. Abernathy went on. "Miss Vance has been submitting weekly operational analyses to a private committee on the board. Her reports have been some of the most insightful, incisive, and brilliant strategic documents we have ever seen. Her understanding of our company's systemic inefficiencies, from supply chain waste to interdepartmental friction, is unparalleled. She identified the very issues in our production line that our last 3 consulting firms missed, saving us an estimated $4 million last quarter alone. We knew she was a genius. We were simply waiting for the right senior-level opportunity to place her in." He looked over at Eleanor with genuine admiration. "We had intended to create a new role for her in the next fiscal year. However, Mr. Sterling's actions have accelerated our timeline. He didn't just expose his own incompetence, he exposed a critical vacancy in operational leadership." He turned back to face us, his expression resolute. "Therefore, it is my distinct pleasure to announce that the board has unanimously appointed Eleanor Vance as the new Director of Operations for Innovate Solutions, effective immediately. She will be overseeing all departmental logistics, process optimization, and internal infrastructure. She will report directly to me." The room was utterly, completely silent. We were all staring at Eleanor, the woman who last night was scrubbing our floors and who now was essentially one of the most powerful people in the company. She met our gazes, her expression unreadable. This was a corporate fairy tale, a bombshell of epic proportions. She stepped forward slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice calm and clear, carrying easily through the stunned office. "I look forward to working with all of you to build a more efficient, a more respectful, and a more innovative company." The day was a whirlwind. Miss Vance, spent most of it in closed-door meetings with Abernathy and the other board members. The rest of us stumbled through our work, gossiping in hushed tones, trying to recalibrate our entire understanding of the world. By late afternoon, Richard Sterling's nameplate had been removed from the CEO's office. A temp plate reading E. Vance, Director of Operations, was installed on the large office next to it. At 5:30 p.m., an email from her went out to all staff. The subject was simple: meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. The body of the email was just as succinct.
Please be prepared to discuss three things: your department's primary function, its biggest inefficiency, and one concrete idea for how to fix it. It was a declaration of intent. The age of surfaces was over. The age of systems had begun. I felt a thrill of genuine excitement. For the first time in years, I felt like the company was actually heading in the right direction.
I was one of the last to leave that night. As I was packing my briefcase, I saw a light on in her new office. The door was slightly ajar. I hesitated, then knocked gently. "Come in," she called out. I pushed the door open. She was standing by the massive window overlooking the city, still in her black pantsuit, holding a tablet. She looked up and offered me a small, familiar smile. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "or should I call you Mark?" "Mark is fine, Miss Vance," I said, feeling suddenly formal and awkward. "Eleanor," she corrected me gently. "I think we're past formalities, don't you?" She gestured to the room. "It's quite a view. I used to be in here at 3 a.m. wiping smudges off this very window." She looked thoughtful for a moment. "Things change." "They certainly do," I agreed. "Congratulations, Eleanor. No one deserves this more. I'm sorry for yesterday, that I didn't say anything." She looked at me, her gaze direct and searching. "Fear is a powerful motivator, Mark, but inaction has consequences for everyone." She looked down at her tablet, her expression shifting, becoming serious and focused. "Which reminds me, there's something I need to show you. Since you're the head of product development, you should see this first." She turned the tablet toward me. On the screen was a live feed from one of the security cameras. It was pointed at the main server room in the basement. As I watched, a figure slipped into the room, using a keycard. The figure was wearing a dark hoodie, but as they turned to make sure the door was shut, the light caught their face. My blood turned to ice. It was Chloe, the marketing intern, the one who had filmed the video. She moved quickly toward the central server rack, pulling a small, malicious-looking USB device from her pocket. My mind raced, struggling to connect the dots. Chloe, the terrified intern who had exposed Richard, was now sneaking into the server room with what looked like a kill stick? It made no sense. "What is she doing?" I breathed, my eyes glued to the tablet. Eleanor didn't look surprised. She just watched the screen with a focused intensity. "She's erasing something, or trying to." When I was cross-referencing building access logs with HR data this afternoon, I found an anomaly. Chloe's keycard was issued by Richard Sterling's executive admin, but her official employment was never processed through HR. She isn't in the payroll system. She's a ghost. On the screen, Chloe plugged the USB drive into a port on the main server. A small red light on the device began to blink. "A ghost?" I asked, completely lost. "A plant," Eleanor clarified, her voice calm and steady. "I think Richard hired her off the books, paid her cash. Her only job was to create a corporate sizzle reel, a puff piece to make him look good for the investors. The camera was always supposed to be rolling on him. He just never imagined he'd be the star of his own downfall." Her eyes narrowed as she watched the screen. When she sent that video to HR, she wasn't being a hero, Mark. She was creating a diversion, Mark. She knew that video was explosive. It would create so much chaos, so much focus on Richard, that no one would be looking anywhere else. "Looking for what?" Eleanor said, tapping a different window on her tablet. It was a complex data transfer log. For the past 3 weeks, massive amounts of proprietary data have been siphoned from our R&D servers, our next-gen project schematics, our entire 5-year product roadmap. It's been happening in small bursts, routed through a dozen shell proxies to mask the destination. The final data packet was scheduled to transfer tonight. Richard wasn't just an arrogant fool. He was a corporate spy. He was planning to fire our entire R&D department next month, citing redundancies, and then take our intellectual property to a competitor. Chloe wasn't his intern. She was his accomplice. The USB stick isn't to destroy the server. It's to erase the transfer logs, to wipe their digital footprints clean. The pieces slammed together in my head with sickening force. Richard's obsession with the investor visit, his paranoia. It wasn't about company pride. It was his grand finale. He was dressing the stage for his final act of betrayal. Firing Eleanor was an impromptu, arrogant mistake, a moment where his hubris got the better of him and he accidentally lit a match in a gas-filled room. "Security is on their way," Eleanor said, almost to herself, "but they won't make it in time. That wipe sequence takes 60 seconds. Without another thought, I turned and ran. I didn't wait for the elevator. I burst through the door to the stairwell, taking the steps 3 at a time. My lungs burned, my heart hammered in my ears, but all I could think about was the schematics, the work of my team, years of innovation about to be stolen and erased. I slammed through the basement door and sprinted down the concrete corridor toward the server room. The heavy insulated door was slightly ajar. I shoved it open and skidded to a halt on the smooth floor. Chloe spun around, her eyes wide with genuine panic. She looked so young, so out of her depth. The red light on the USB stick was blinking faster now. "Stay back," she shrieked, her voice thin and reedy. "He promised me a full-time job, a real salary." Her voice cracked. She was just a kid who had been manipulated by a master predator. The red light on the USB drive suddenly turned solid. A countdown appeared on a small LCD screen I hadn't noticed before. 10, 9, 8. I didn't have time to talk her down. I lunged, not at her, but at the server rack. She flinched, but it gave me the split second I needed. I grabbed the edge of the rack and yanked with every ounce of strength I had. The heavy steel frame groaned, tilted, and then crashed down onto the floor with a deafening boom, ripping a dozen cables from the wall and plunging the room into darkness, save for the red emergency lights. The USB drive was torn from its port, its little screen going dark just as it flashed the number 3. The silence that followed was broken only by our ragged breathing and the high-pitched whine of the backup power kicking in. Chloe was sobbing, huddled against the far wall. A moment later, the door flew open and 2 security guards stormed in, flashlights cutting through the gloom. They had her in cuffs in seconds. I stood there, breathing heavily, surrounded by the wreckage of our server rack. And then I saw Eleanor, standing calmly in the doorway, her tablet tucked under her arm. She surveyed the scene, the crying intern, the toppled server, the tangle of wires, and then she looked at me. For the first time since this whole insane saga began, she allowed herself a genuine wide smile. "Excellent problem-solving, Mark," she said. "A bit unorthodox in your methods, but effective." The next few weeks were a blur of activity and change. The FBI got involved. Richard Sterling and his competitor accomplice were arrested in a splashy, newsworthy raid. Chloe, given her age and cooperation, was given a much lighter sentence. The company was rocked to its core, but under Eleanor's leadership, it didn't shatter, it reformed. She was a revelation. She moved through the company not with the arrogance of a new boss, but with the quiet purpose of a master engineer tuning a complex machine. Her first all-hands meeting wasn't a lecture, it was a Q&A session. She listened, she asked questions, she remembered people's names. She walked the floors, not to inspect them for scuff marks, but to talk to the people working there, to understand their challenges. She implemented the best of the ideas submitted by the staff. She streamlined our absurdly complicated expense reporting system. She tore down the walls between departments, forcing collaboration and communication. She invested in new equipment for the labs and better chairs for the analysts. She started a company-funded continuing education program. She saw the soul of the company, the human beings who made it run, and she nurtured it. About a month after the incident, I found a small potted plant on my desk. It was a sturdy little succulent with a note attached. It read, "Sometimes the things we overlook are the most resilient. Thank you for acting. Eleanor." That evening, I was working late again, finalizing the roadmap for our next project, a project we now owned, free and clear. As I packed up, I saw her, walking through the quiet office. She wasn't wearing a power suit anymore, just a simple blouse and slacks. In her hand, she held a small watering can. She moved from desk to desk, watering the sad little office plants, just like she always had. the quiet, steady presence, restoring order to the chaos. She wasn't a janitor who became a director. She was a leader who had been waiting for the rest of us to see past the uniform. And as I watched her tend to those forgotten plants, I knew our company was finally in the right hands. The surface was no longer the reality. The reality was the work, the people, and the quiet dignity of a job well done.